In 1841, a plantation owner made an unthinkable announcement. He was placing his daughter under the complete control of an enslaved man. But this wasn't an act of madness. It was the first move in a secret war. What followed was a conspiracy of revenge that would lead to 13 dead men, a plantation in ashes, and a secret so dark it was buried for over a century. In the April of 1841, a man named Silas Rutledge made a declaration so shocking it unsettled even the most hardened plantation owners across South Carolina. He was placing his 28-year-old daughter, Catherine, a woman weighing more than 260 pounds, under the complete and total authority of an enslaved man named Ezekiel Cross. This was not for nursing, nor for simple companionship. This was a transfer of control in every sense that mattered, save for the legal documents. The white society of Colleton County was utterly scandalized, but they had no conception of what Rutledge was truly attempting, nor any idea what Ezekiel Cross would ultimately do to Catherine in the months that followed. By November of that same year, Catherine's body had been transformed in a manner no one could comprehend. 13 men were dead, and the Cypress Grove plantation had been reduced to smoldering ash. What truly transpired between that enslaved man and the daughter of the plantation owner? What did he do to her that would horrify every person who saw it? Before we reveal this deeply disturbing truth, make sure to subscribe, hit that notification bell, and tell us which state you're from in the comments below. Now, let me transport you back to where this all started. Spring came to Colleton County that year with a stifling, oppressive heat and a humidity so thick the very air felt solid. The Combahee River drifted sluggishly through the low country, its dark waters mirroring the Spanish moss that dangled from ancient live oak trees like funeral veils. For miles, rice paddies stretched into the distance, their flooded fields worked by hundreds of enslaved people who labored in water up to their knees from the first light of dawn until the fall of dusk. This was a fortune constructed on a foundation of suffering, a prosperity violently extracted from human misery. All of it rationalized by men who had persuaded themselves that brutality was merely the natural way of the world. The Cypress Grove plantation sprawled across 800 acres of moderately productive land. Its proprietor, Silas Rutledge, was not quite a member of the county's elite, yet he desperately longed to be. He owned 58 enslaved human beings, a number that marked him as a wealthy man by most measures. Yet it only barely qualified him as mid-tier within the local social structure. The genuinely powerful families held title to thousands of acres and hundreds of slaves. They spent their summers in Charleston and sent their children to prestigious universities in the North. Their names possessed an influence that could open any door or shatter any reputation with a single utterance. Silas had married Elizabeth Yancey back in 1812, a union that provided him with respectable land holdings and a well-regarded family name. Elizabeth had been a pragmatic woman, maintaining meticulous records and appearing more concerned with profit margins than social ascension. She died during childbirth in 1813, leaving behind a daughter who was christened Catherine. For 28 years, Silas raised Catherine by himself, focusing his energies entirely on penetrating the inner circles of county power. He was a tall man, gaunt in the way of people who neglect to eat when consumed by a singular fixation. His hair had turned gray prematurely, lending him a severe look that matched his cold disposition. In business, he had a reputation for being shrewd, yet honorable enough, the sort of man who would negotiate a tough deal, but would ultimately stand by his word. His daughter, Catherine, had been raised in isolation, educated by private tutors, never truly fitting in anywhere. By 1841, She was 28 years old and weighed nearly 260 pounds. Her body was bloated from years of medications prescribed by doctors who had diagnosed her with hysteria and various female nervous disorders. She was prone to violent fits where she would scream and hurl objects across a room. The previous year, she had assaulted her father with a letter opener, leaving a permanent scar across his left hand. The white society of Culleton County whispered about her with a hollow, feigned sympathy. Poor Silas Rutledge, saddled with a mad daughter. What a tragedy. She had been such a lovely little girl. None of them knew the actual truth. None of them were aware of what Catherine had witnessed when she was just 12 years old, or that her so-called madness was not insanity at all, but a perfectly rational reaction to living among monsters. The letter arrived on April the 7th, delivered by a private courier. Silas opened it in his study, anticipating standard business correspondence. Instead, he discovered 3 pages written on expensive paper, sealed with red wax bearing a symbol he recognized instantly. A scythe crossed with wheat stalks, the mark of the Brethren of the Harvest. The Brethren were 13 men who gathered under the cover of darkness to perform rituals they believed fortified the land through blood sacrifice. They blended old European traditions with beliefs appropriated from enslaved people who understood the world of spirits and power. They were convinced that the strong were destined to consume the weak, literally, when the situation demanded it. Silas had been initiated into their ranks in 1822, over 19 years. He had attended roughly 40 gatherings, participating in rituals that ranged from deeply unsettling to utterly monstrous. This letter informed him he was in debt to the tune of $12,000, a sum accumulated through years of gambling losses and failed investments, an impossible amount. Repayment would necessitate selling off most of his land and every one of his slaves, annihilating everything he had built. But the letter presented an alternative, a demonstration of commitment required from members finding themselves in difficult positions. Silas was to take his daughter, Catherine, and place her under the complete authority of one of his enslaved men, not temporarily, not as a punishment, but as a genuine transfer of responsibility for 1 full year. The enslaved man would be granted total control over her person, her daily routine, and her treatment. Silas was to announce this publicly at a gathering of the county's prominent families, explaining it as an extreme medical measure for his daughter's condition. The humiliation would be absolute. In a society where white women were supposedly cherished and protected above all else, Silas would be declaring his own daughter to be of less value than his property. But if he agreed, his debt would be completely forgiven, and the Brethren would provide the financial backing to restore his standing. Silas remained in his study for hours that night, weighing his options. Bankruptcy would mean his total ruin. The Brethren had connections to every judge, every lawyer, every politician in the region. They could make him vanish if he became a liability, or he could sacrifice his daughter's dignity to preserve his own position. It was the choice his society had conditioned him to make: property over people, power over morality. He wrote his letter of acceptance by candlelight and sent it off before the break of dawn. 3 days later, a second letter arrived, containing a name and a brief history. Ezekiel Cross, age 33. Recently purchased through an intermediary from a Virginia plantation. His listed skills included carpentry and herbal medicine. His temperament was described as quiet and obedient. What the letter did not reveal was that Ezekiel Cross had been chosen for this role with deliberate intent, that his placement at Cypress Grove was no mere coincidence, that he carried within him his own searing need for justice. and the profound patience to wait for the perfect moment to achieve it. Ezekiel arrived on April the 13th in a wagon driven by a slave trader named Henderson. The wagon pulled up directly in front of the main house, which was unusual, as most transactions involving slaves occurred near the barns. Silas walked out onto the porch, shading his eyes from the morning sun. In the bed of the wagon sat Ezekiel. The first thing Silas noticed was his eyes. Most enslaved individuals kept their gaze lowered as a fundamental survival tactic, but Ezekiel looked directly at Silas, his expression calm and evaluative. It made Silas profoundly uneasy. Ezekiel was tall, perhaps 6 feet 2 inches, with broad shoulders and lean muscle built from a lifetime of hard labor. His skin was unmarked by the scars of the lash. His clothes were simple but clean. His hands were large and calloused, yet his fingers suggested a precision born of skilled work, not just brute force. Henderson climbed down and handed the papers over to Silas. Ezekiel Cross, as you requested. His previous owner said he's quiet but capable. Your associates wanted you to know this one was chosen with particular care. Silas barely glanced at the documents. He addressed Ezekiel directly. You understand why you are here? Yes, sir. Ezekiel's voice was deep and measured, carrying a slight Virginia accent. My daughter is unwell. You will be responsible for her care. The doctors have been unsuccessful. You claim to have knowledge of herbal treatments. My grandmother was a healer, sir. She taught me before I was sold. The transaction was completed with swift efficiency. Ezekiel was shown to a small cabin situated near the main house, separate from the other slave quarters. He was given basic supplies and informed that his duties would commence the following day. He was told that his sole responsibility was the care of Catherine, and that failure would result in severe consequences. Ezekiel nodded and said, Yes, sir, whenever it was required. Then he was left alone. For the first time since his arrival, he allowed his expression to shift. His jaw unclenched slightly. His shoulders relaxed. He sat on the narrow bed and pulled a small cloth bundle from inside his shirt. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a worn piece of paper with 3 names written in a child's unsteady script. Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth, his wife, his son, his daughter. They had been sold away from him 3 years prior to a plantation in Alabama that was notorious for working its slaves to death. He had since learned that all 3 had died within 18 months. Sarah from an untreated fever, Benjamin from an injury that turned septic, and Ruth from simply giving up, a 6-year-old child who stopped eating because she could not comprehend why her family had been torn apart. And Silas Rutledge had been the one to sell them, not because he needed the money, not because they had committed any offense, but because he had been demonstrating to the brethren that he could make ruthless decisions without sentiment. He had splintered a family like kindling for a fire. Ezekiel had spent 2 years deliberately working his way south, allowing himself to be sold from one plantation to the next, always gathering intelligence. He learned about the brethren through hushed whispers. He learned about their rituals and their members. He learned that they considered themselves to be beyond any form of consequence. When the opportunity arose to be sold specifically to Rutledge, Ezekiel knew this was his chance. He would have access to Rutledge's house, to his secrets, to his vulnerabilities. And sometimes, he knew, justice did not come from courts or laws, but from patience, from strategy, and from a willingness to become just as monstrous as the situation demanded. He refolded the paper bearing the 3 names and tucked it safely away. Then he lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, and began to plan his next moves. His first day began on April the 14th. A house slave named Judith, a middle-aged woman with hair already turning gray, brought him to Catherine's room on the second floor. She knocked with obvious reluctance. "Miss Catherine, your father has brought someone to help with your treatments." A crash came from inside the room, something heavy striking the wall. Then Catherine's voice, slurred yet full of venom. "I do not want more treatments. Send him away." Judith looked at Ezekiel with pity. "She has bad days. This is one of them." Ezekiel opened the door and stepped inside, closing it before Judith could follow. The room was large but dark, with heavy curtains drawn shut. The air was stale, carrying the smells of unwashed bedding and something else, the sweet, rotten scent of mercury. Books were scattered across the floor. A shattered picture frame lay against the wall. Clothes were strewn everywhere. Catherine sat in a chair by the cold fireplace, wrapped in a stained dressing gown. Her dark hair hung loose and tangled. Her face was puffy, her eyes unfocused. Her hands trembled continuously on the arms of the chair. She looked at Ezekiel with confusion, then fear, then pure anger. "Who are you?" I said. "No more doctors." "I am not a doctor, miss. My name is Ezekiel. Your father asked me to help you." "Help?" She let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "That is what they all say. Help, treatment, medicine. What they mean is poison. They mean chains. They mean silence." She stood up suddenly, swaying on her feet. "I know what this is. He is punishing me again for remembering, for speaking, for refusing to forget." Ezekiel remained still, making no threatening moves. "What are you supposed to forget?" The question caught her off guard. Her anger flickered, revealing something more vulnerable beneath. "You do not know." "I know nothing, miss. Only that your father says you are unwell." Catherine studied him intently, as if truly seeing him for the first time. "You are not from here. Virginia, originally, miss. Do you know what happens in this house? What they do in the cellar?" Ezekiel's pulse quickened, but he kept his expression neutral. "I do not know what you mean." Liar. There was no heat in the word, only exhaustion. "Everyone lies. It is easier than the truth." She sat back down heavily. "Leave me alone. Tell my father his newest tormentor has failed." But Ezekiel moved to the window and drew back the curtains. Sunlight came flooding in. Catherine cried out, covering her eyes. "When did you last go outside, miss?" "I cannot walk that far. I am too weak." "When did you last eat without laudanum in it?" "The medicine is necessary. The doctors say so." "What if the doctors are wrong?" Her hands fell from her eyes. She stared at him, a mixture of hope and terror in her gaze. "What did you say?" Ezekiel turned from the window. This was the moment, the first card played in a dangerous game. "I said, what if the doctors are wrong? What if everything you have been told about your condition was designed not to help you, but to keep you controllable? What if your father has been poisoning you for years to make certain you never become well enough to speak about what you saw?" Absolute silence fell. Catherine's eyes went wide. The trembling in her hands stilled. For half a minute, she simply sat there, her mind working. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, clearer. "He told you." "Your father told me nothing, miss, but I have eyes. I know the signs of mercury poisoning. I know what long-term laudanum use does. Healthy women do not become like this without someone working very hard to make them this way." "Why would you say this?" Suspicion crept back into her tone. "This is a trick. You are testing me." "I am telling you that I can help you become truly well, clear-minded, strong enough to walk out of this room. But it will not be easy. Your body has been dependent on those medicines for years. Stopping will be painful. You will feel worse before you feel better, and your father will not approve. Then why would you do it? Ezekiel met her eyes directly. Because I have my own reasons for wanting Silas Rutledge to suffer, and the best way to make him suffer is to return to him a daughter who is sane enough to remember everything and strong enough to speak about it. It was a dangerous truth to voice so plainly. But Catherine was damaged, not stupid. She would see through manipulation, but a genuine common cause that she might believe. You want revenge on my father? Yes, miss. What did he do to you? He sold my family, my wife, and my 2 children. He sent them to their deaths for no reason other than to prove something to men who measure worth by cruelty. Catherine absorbed this, then nodded slowly. The brethren. He sold them for the brethren. It was not a question. The brethren, miss? You will learn, she said. Everyone learns eventually. She leaned forward. If I agree, if I let you help me, what happens then? You get well, miss, and when you are well, we decide what to do next. I have my revenge to plan. You have yours. Perhaps they align. Catherine studied him with intense focus. Finally, she spoke. I want them all dead. My father, Judge Pelham, Reverend Crenshaw, all of them. Every man who stood in that cellar. I want them to suffer first, to know it is coming, to beg. Then I want them dead. The venom in her voice was shocking, not for its intensity, but because it came from someone everyone had dismissed as met and harmless. This was not madness. This was rage, concentrated by years of suppression. Ezekiel nodded. Then we have an understanding, Miss Catherine. If we are conspirators, use my name. I cannot, miss. Not where anyone might hear. We must be careful. Then know something, Ezekiel. Catherine's eyes glittered with a dangerous light. I have killed before. 3 people. House slaves who might have told my father about my lucid moments. I cannot remember exactly how. The laudanum blurs everything. But I know I did it. They disappeared. Their families were told they ran away. She smiled a terrible smile. So if you plan to betray me, to use me, and then dispose of me, know that I am not a victim. I am something worse. A chill ran down Ezekiel's spine. He had expected an ally, not someone whose capacity for violence might rival his own. But he held his composure. I believe you, miss, and I will not betray you. Good. Catherine stood, more steadily this time. Then let us begin. But I have one condition. When this is over, when we have had our revenge, I want to die. I do not want to live with what I have seen and what I have done. You will help me with that too. Agreed. Ezekiel had not anticipated this, but he was committed now. Agreed. Then we have a deal. Catherine extended her hand. After a moment's hesitation, Ezekiel shook it. Her grip was stronger than he had expected. Over the following week, Ezekiel began Catherine's treatment. He gradually reduced her laudanum, replacing a portion of it with herbal tinctures, valerian root for anxiety and sleep, chamomile for digestive distress, milk thistle to help her liver process the accumulated toxins. The process was brutal. Catherine spent 3 days confined to her bed, racked with fever, violent shaking, and vomiting. Ezekiel stayed with her through it all, holding a basin while she was sick, wiping her face with cool cloths, speaking to her quietly, just to remind her she was not alone. When the worst of it passed, she was desperately weak, but her mind was clearer than it had been in years. The constant tremor had decreased. Her speech was less slurred. She could focus on reading. Then the real work began. Ezekiel had her walking short distances at first, from her room to the end of the hallway and back. It exhausted her, but he insisted, every day pushing her to go a little further. He adjusted her diet, bringing her lean meats and vegetables instead of heavy pastries. He limited her portions strictly, though she fought him on it. Years of using food for comfort made restriction a battle. While working on her physical recovery, they talked. Catherine told him about the cellar, about what she had witnessed at age 12. She described it in graphic detail that turned Ezekiel's stomach, but he listened without interruption. She told him about the years of gaslighting that followed, her father convincing everyone, including at times Catherine herself, that she was insane, that she had invented the memories, that nothing she said could be trusted. She told him about the journal she kept hidden, pages documenting dates and times when her father left late at night, names of visitors who came at strange hours, sounds from below that should not have been possible. Ezekiel told her about his family, about Sarah, who sang while she worked and taught their children to read despite the immense danger, about Benjamin, who at 8 years old could perform mathematics that amazed the overseers, about Ruth, who loved flowers and would pick wild blooms to make their cabin beautiful. He told her how Silas had come to the Virginia plantation with a buyer's warrant, how he had inspected them like livestock, how he had agreed to purchase all three for a reasonable price, only to change the terms at the last moment, saying he only needed the woman and children, not Ezekiel. How he had deliberately torn the family apart for no practical reason, but simply because he could. He smiled when he did it. Ezekiel said quietly, "That is what I remember most. My son crying, holding my leg, begging. My wife trying to be strong, telling Benjamin to be brave. And your father smiled, like it pleased him to cause that pain." Catherine listened with her newly clear eyes. "I am sorry. I know sorry is just a word, but I am sorry you suffered because of what my father is. You are not responsible for what he does, miss. No, but I am responsible for what I do next. And I promise you, Ezekiel, he will pay for what he took from you. They will all pay." The formal announcement was scheduled for April the 29th. 41 people gathered in the Cypress Grove dining room for what the invitations had described as an important family announcement. The county's elite arrived in their carriages. Judge Pelham with his wife, Eleanor, Reverend Crenshaw with his daughter, Marcus Fanning and his family, Benjamin Lyle from the bank. The meal was extravagant. Oysters, roasted duck, multiple rice dishes, sweet potatoes, fresh bread, and a towering cake for dessert. Throughout it all, Catherine sat at her father's right hand, eating sparingly, speaking when spoken to, but offering nothing voluntarily. Ezekiel served alongside the other house slaves, moving quietly, refilling glasses, clearing plates. He was invisible to most of the guests, but he listened to every word, watched every interaction, filing away every piece of information. After dessert, Silas stood and tapped his glass. "My friends, thank you for joining us. As you know, Catherine has been unwell for many years. We have tried every treatment, doctors from Charleston, a specialist from Philadelphia. Nothing helped. Until recently." He gestured toward Ezekiel. "2 weeks ago, I brought in Ezekiel, who has knowledge of herbal medicine. As you can see, Catherine is much improved. Clearer, calmer, more herself than she has been in many years." Polite murmurs traveled around the table. Catherine kept her expression neutral, though Ezekiel saw her hands gripping her napkin tightly beneath the table. This improvement, Silas continued, has led me to a difficult decision. Catherine requires ongoing care that is more intensive than our household can provide. After much consideration, I have decided that Ezekiel will assume full responsibility for my daughter's welfare. He will have complete authority over her treatment, her daily activities, and her living arrangements, effective immediately. The murmurs changed in tone. Confusion now. Several guests exchanged glances. Mrs. Pelham's face registered pure shock. Marcus Fanning spoke up. Silas, I do not understand. You are placing your daughter under a slave's care? Permanently. I am placing her with the one person who has succeeded where all others have failed. My daughter's health is more important to me than social convention. But surely, Reverend Crenshaw interjected carefully, there are other options. A companion, a nurse, someone more appropriate. Silas's expression hardened. I have made my decision. Catherine agrees. You not, daughter? All eyes turned to Catherine. This was the moment she could refuse, could expose everything, could bring it all crashing down. Instead, she smiled, a small, controlled smile that revealed nothing. I trust my father's judgment. Ezekiel has been kind, and his treatments help. I am content with this arrangement. It was perfectly delivered. But Ezekiel saw what the others did not. Her knuckles were white where she gripped that napkin, and there was a flash in her eyes that promised violence. She was playing the required role of the obedient daughter, but inside, she was screaming. The evening passed in a cloud of awkward conversation. Some guests left early. Others stayed to speak with Silas privately, asking questions they did not want voiced publicly. Ezekiel caught fragments. Are you certain this is wise? What will people say? The brethren will not approve of this becoming public. That last came from Judge Pelham, spoken in a low voice near the study door. Silas's response was too quiet to hear, but whatever he said made Pelham nod and clap him on the shoulder. By midnight, all the guests had departed. Catherine retired to her room. Silas went to his study. Ezekiel helped with the cleanup, then made his way upstairs. He knocked softly on Catherine's door. Come in. She was sitting by the window, still in her dinner dress, looking out at the dark grounds. She did not turn. It is done then. I am officially your responsibility. Property of property. How absurd. How are you feeling, miss? I want to burn this house down with everyone in it. But we must be patient. Is that not what you tell me? Yes, miss. I agreed because I want them to feel secure. I want them to think this is just my father's eccentricity. I want them to forget about me while we work. She turned to look at him. Did you see their faces? The disgust, the pity. They think I am pathetic. They have no idea what we are planning. And what exactly are we planning, miss? Catherine moved to her dresser and pulled out a wooden box. Inside were papers covered in her handwriting. I have been documenting everything I remember for years. Dates, names, descriptions of their rituals. It is all coded so it looks like nonsense if it is found, but I can decode it. We have enough here to destroy 20 men. And will anyone believe us, miss? A woman recently recovered from madness and an enslaved man? No, which is precisely why we need proof. Something they cannot possibly dismiss. Real, physical evidence. She pulled out one specific page. I know where they keep their records. The Brethren maintains a ledger of all their activities, every ritual, every sacrifice, every member's participation. It ensures that everyone is equally guilty. My father mentioned it years ago, before he realized I would remember. Where is this ledger? In the cellar. There is a hidden room beyond the main chamber. I never saw inside, but I heard them talk about it. That is where they keep everything they cannot afford to lose. Ezekiel felt a thrill of excitement mixed with dread. Such a ledger would be devastating evidence, but obtaining it meant venturing into the very heart of the Brethren's domain. We would need to access it when the house is quiet. My father travels to Charleston monthly for business. The next trip is May the 14th. He will be gone for 3 days. That gives us 2 weeks to prepare. We need the cellar's layout. Every room, every hiding place. I can help. I have been thinking about this for 16 years. I know exactly what needs to happen. They spent an hour going over details, speaking in whispers. Catherine sketched the cellar's layout from memory. Ezekiel asked about guards, keys, and the schedules of the slaves. When he finally left her room, it was nearly 2 in the morning. He made his way to his small cabin, his mind racing. He was now fully committed to a conspiracy with a woman who was brilliant, damaged, and utterly frightening. He pulled out the paper with his family's names and looked at it by candlelight. I am doing this for you. For Sarah, for Benjamin, for Ruth, for every person who has suffered because men like Silas Rutledge believe their power gives them the right to destroy lives. He blew out the candle and lay in the darkness, listening to the house settle around him. Somewhere below, in a cellar he had never seen, were secrets that could tear apart the most powerful families in South Carolina. In 2 weeks, he would go down there to find them. The 2 weeks passed with a deceptive calm. Catherine continued to improve. Her weight dropped. Her mind remained sharp. She walked a little further each day. More importantly, she was translating sections of her coded journals for Ezekiel, filling in details about the Brethren that made his blood run cold. The Brethren is not unique to Colleton County, Catherine explained one afternoon. It is part of a larger network across the South, connected societies in Charleston, Savannah, New Orleans, Richmond, different names, but always the same structure. Wealthy men who believe their power derives from ancient practices of dominance and sacrifice. They believe they are continuing traditions going back thousands of years. She continued. European mystery cults mixed with things they learned from enslaved people. They have twisted it all into something monstrous. A justification for things that have no justification. And the sacrifices? Not always human. Sometimes animals. But other times they take people who will not be missed. Slaves with no family. Poor whites who wander onto their properties. Once I heard my father mention a child, but I do not know if that was literal. Where do the bodies go? The swamps are on every plantation. Bodies go in and are never found. Alligators do the rest. And this ledger documents all of it. Every ritual for 40 years. Names, dates, descriptions. They keep it because they need mutual complicity. Everyone is equally guilty, so no one can expose the others without destroying themselves. May the 14th arrived. Silas left for Charleston in the early morning, taking his carriage and a manservant. He would be staying with associates, attending to business, and was expected back on the evening of May the 16th. That gave them almost 3 full days. They waited until nightfall before making their move. The house settled into its evening routine. By 10 o'clock, the main house was silent. They met in Catherine's room. She had changed into simple, dark clothes that allowed for freedom of movement, her hair pulled back tightly. She looked like someone preparing for battle. "Are you certain, miss?" "I have never been more certain. Let us go." The cellar entrance was in the kitchen, hidden behind the pantry. The door looked like a wall panel, but when pressed in the right spot, it clicked open, revealing a narrow set of stairs descending into darkness. The smell hit them immediately: damp earth, old smoke, and something organic and rotten. Catherine noticed his reaction. "You get used to it. I wish I could say you stop smelling it, but I would be lying." They descended carefully, Ezekiel carrying a shuttered lantern that provided only a minimal amount of light. The stairs were steep and worn, the wood creaking under their weight. After 20 steps, they reached the bottom. The cellar was larger than Ezekiel had expected, easily 30 feet square, with low ceilings supported by thick beams. The floor was packed earth. The walls were lined with stones that wept moisture. At the center was what Catherine called the altar, though now it looked like just a heavy wooden table. But the dark stains on its surface and the grooves carved into its edges told their own story. Around the room were candle holders, clay jars sealed with wax, wooden boxes, and a rack holding black robes trimmed with crimson. Along one wall, shelves contained books and papers. Catherine moved with the certainty of someone following a memorized map. She led Ezekiel to the far wall, where the stones seemed solid, but she pressed one particular stone, and something clicked. A section of the wall swung inward, revealing another chamber. This room was smaller, about 10 feet square, and here the brethren kept its most terrible secrets. The ledger sat on a wooden stand in the center of the room. It was massive, 2 feet tall and 18 inches wide, bound in dark leather with metal clasps. Next to it were smaller journals. Around the walls were shelves containing jars that Ezekiel refused to examine too closely. "There," Catherine whispered, pointing. "That is what we need." Ezekiel moved to the stand and opened the book carefully. The pages were thick parchment, covered in meticulous handwriting. Names and dates went back to 1800. Ritual descriptions were written in clinical detail, like scientific experiments rather than recorded atrocities. He began to read, and with each entry, his horror deepened. These men had not just committed occasional violence, they had made it systematic. Regular gatherings every 6 weeks, rituals timed to agricultural cycles, believing that blood fed the land. They had killed at least 37 people over the years, probably more, mostly enslaved people, but also poor whites, indigenous people, anyone vulnerable. And there were notes about consumption. They had not just killed, they had eaten. Pieces of victims prepared in specific ways, consumed during ritualistic meals they believed transferred power. "Dear God," Ezekiel whispered, "this is worse than I imagined. I tried to tell you." Catherine's voice was flat. "I watched them when I was 12. I watched them cut pieces from that woman on the altar. I watched my father raise a goblet and drink. Then I spent 16 years being told I was insane, that I had imagined it all. But I knew. I always knew." Ezekiel turned the pages, looking for entries about his family. He found them in October of 1838. 3 lines. "Purchased family unit from Virginia. Woman Sarah. Children Benjamin and Ruth. Separated from male to demonstrate resolve. Sent to Alabama contact. Payment received." 3 lines. That was all his family's destruction merited. "We need to take this," Ezekiel said, his voice tight with rage. "No," Catherine said, her hand on his arm. "If we take it now, they will know immediately. We need to copy the most important entries first." She was right, but Ezekiel wanted to burn it. All right then. Yet revenge required patience. It required being smarter than the enemy. They spent the next 3 hours working. Catherine had brought paper and ink. She copied entries about specific rituals, focusing on ones that named current members. Ezekiel documented the victims, creating a list of names and dates that could potentially be cross-referenced with other records. It was exhausting work, made infinitely worse by the content. Several times, Ezekiel had to stop, his hands shaking too badly to continue. Once, Catherine left the chamber entirely, overcome by memories. But slowly, methodically, they built their case, page after page of evidence. They were so focused, neither of them heard the footsteps on the cellar stairs. The first indication that something was wrong was when light flared in the outer chamber, lantern light, much brighter than their single lamp. Ezekiel looked up sharply, his blood running cold. Silas Rutledge stood in the doorway, flanked by two other men. Behind them, at least 4 more figures stood in the main cellar. "I must admit," Silas said calmly, "I am impressed. I did not think you would find the inner chamber." Catherine stood slowly, placing herself between her father and Ezekiel. "You were supposed to be in Charleston." "I was supposed to be," Silas replied, "but I never trusted your miraculous recovery, so I made other arrangements. I left this morning, yes, but I returned this afternoon, and have been watching the house all evening, waiting to see what you would do." He stepped into the chamber, the 2 men blocking the exit. "Did you really think I would not anticipate this? That I would not prepare for the possibility you might remember, might seek revenge? You have been poisoning me for 16 years. Catherine's voice was steady despite everything. "And you expect me to simply accept that? I expect you to understand that it was necessary. You saw something you should not have seen as a child. You could not understand. I could not allow you to destroy everything. I was 12, and I watched you murder a woman and eat her flesh. That was not fear, Father. That was a reasonable response to witnessing evil." Evil? Such a simple word. Silas moved further into the room, his eyes moving between Catherine and Ezekiel. "And you, using my daughter to get to me, filling her head with ideas of revenge." Ezekiel said nothing, calculating distances and odds. 7 men against 1, with Catherine in no condition to fight. The situation looked hopeless. Silas seemed to read his thoughts. "Do not do anything foolish. I do not want to hurt either of you. Not permanently, but I cannot have this rebellion continuing." He gestured to the men behind him. "Bring them upstairs. We need to discuss what happens next." They were taken to Silas's study and locked inside together. The room was windowless except for one high transom, impossible to reach. The door was heavy oak, locked from the outside. As soon as they were alone, Catherine moved to Ezekiel. "Are you hurt?" "No, miss, but we are in serious trouble." "Yes, but not as much as you think." She pulled something from inside her dress, the papers they had been copying. "I managed to keep these. He did not search me. Too confident. That will not help us if we are dead. We are not going to die. Not tonight." Catherine's eyes were calculating. "My father will want to resolve this without killing me, if it is possible. I am still his daughter, his blood. That gives us leverage." Over the next hour, they heard arrivals, voices in the hall, men gathering. The brethren was assembling. Finally, the door opened. Marcus Fanning stood there, his face grim. "They are ready for you. Come peacefully, and you will not be harmed." They were led down to the cellar again. This time, the main chamber had been transformed. All 13 Brethren members were present, dressed in their ritual robes. Candles burned in every holder. The altar was draped with a crimson cloth. 13 chairs were arranged in a perfect circle, all occupied except for Silas's at the head of the altar. Ezekiel and Catherine were positioned in the center of the circle, forced to stand facing Silas. The other members watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Silas removed his hood. "Brothers of the harvest, thank you for coming on such short notice. We face a crisis. My daughter and her associate have discovered our inner chamber." They saw the ledger. They were copying entries when I interrupted them. Judge Pelham spoke up. "Then they must be silenced. Permanently. This is not complicated." "I disagree." Silas held up a hand. "My daughter is blood. I cannot simply dispose of her without exhausting other options. And the man represents an opportunity." "What opportunity?" Reverend Crenshaw asked. "To test something I have long believed, that a person can be drawn into our work through their own actions, if framed correctly." Silas turned to Ezekiel. "You want revenge on me. You want to destroy me for what I did to your family. I understand that. But what if I offered you a different kind of revenge, a more meaningful one?" "I do not understand," Ezekiel said carefully. "I am offering you membership, not as an equal. The Brethren does not accept men of color as full members, but as an associate. You would attend our gatherings, participate in our rituals, and in exchange, I would give you what you want most. My family is dead. You cannot give me what I want." "No, but I can give you revenge against the people who killed them. The plantation owner in Alabama who worked your wife and children to death. His name is Edward Gaines. He is not part of the Brethren. He has no protection from us. If you join us, prove your loyalty, I will give you the resources to destroy him. Money, information, whatever you need to make him suffer as you have suffered." The offer hung in the air, obscene in its calculation. Join the men who had destroyed his family to get revenge on another monster. "And if I refuse, then you and Catherine both die tonight. Your bodies go into the swamp. No one will ever know what happened. The papers Catherine was copying will be burned. Her journals destroyed. Everything continues as it always has." Silas spread his hands. "But if you accept, you live. Catherine lives. You get your revenge. All it costs is your soul." Ezekiel looked at Catherine. Her face was pale, but she gave him the slightest shake of her head. "Don't do it. Whatever happens, do not become them." But Ezekiel was thinking about accepting, about getting inside their organization, about gathering more evidence, about buying time. He looked back at Silas and Catherine. "What happens to her?" "She returns to her room, resumes her medications, forgets what she has seen. The alternative is she dies alongside you." "No." Catherine's voice cut across the chamber. "I will not forget again. I will not be silenced. Kill me if you must, Father, but I will not pretend I do not know what you are." Silas's expression hardened. "Then you have made your choice." "Wait." Ezekiel spoke quickly. "I accept, but on one condition. Catherine goes free, not back to her room. Free. Let her leave this house, leave South Carolina. Give her money to start over. If you do that, I will join you." Several Brethren members shook their heads. But Judge Pelham spoke. "The boy makes a point. The girl is already broken. Even if she spoke, who would believe her? But a man willing to join us, to be complicit. That is valuable. That proves our power extends even to those who hate us." Silas considered this. Finally, he nodded. "Very well. Catherine will be sent north. I have associates in Philadelphia who will take her in. She will be given a new identity and a stipend to live on, but she can never return to South Carolina. Never contact anyone from her old life. She will be dead to everyone here. Agreed. Catherine stared at Ezekiel. No, I will not leave you two. Agreed. Ezekiel interrupted. She goes free. I join you. Then we have a bargain. Silas turned to the others. Catherine leaves tomorrow. Ezekiel's initiation will be in 3 weeks at our next regular gathering. Until then, he remains at Cypress Grove under watch. If he tries to escape or contact anyone, the deal is void and both die. Understood? Ezekiel nodded. Catherine looked like she wanted to argue, but Ezekiel caught her eye and shook his head slightly. Trust me. Catherine left the next morning. A closed carriage took her away at dawn. Ezekiel watched from his cabin window as it rolled down the long drive and disappeared into the trees. She had not been allowed to say goodbye. He had not been allowed to speak with her after the confrontation in the cellar. But as she had been escorted to her room the previous night, she had looked back at him once, and in her eyes he had seen something that gave him hope. She understood. She knew he had not truly surrendered. She knew this was a strategy, not a defeat. The question was whether she would actually go to Philadelphia, or whether she had plans of her own. The 3 weeks that followed were the longest of Ezekiel's life. He was kept under constant watch. 2 overseers followed him everywhere. He was not allowed to leave the plantation grounds. He was given menial work to keep him occupied, meaningless tasks that accomplished nothing but filled the time. But he was also given access to the main house, to the study where Silas kept his papers, to the cellar where the next gathering would take place. They were watching him, yes, but they were also testing him, seeing if he would try to escape, seeing if he would attempt sabotage. Ezekiel did neither. He played the role of a defeated man who had made a pragmatic choice for survival. He was quiet, obedient, asked no questions, caused no problems, but he was observing everything, learning the routines of the house, noting which slaves could be trusted, which overseers were cruel, which brethren members visited regularly. He was building a mental map of how everything worked, looking for weaknesses, and at night, alone in his cabin, he thought about what was coming. His initiation would require participation in their rituals. They would test him. They would want to make him complicit in something so horrible he could never expose them without destroying himself. He thought about how far he was willing to go, what lines he would not cross, even for revenge, whether there was any act so terrible that justice did not justify it. He did not have good answers to those questions. On June the 2nd, the night before his initiation, Silas came to his cabin. It was late, after midnight. Ezekiel woke to a knocking and opened the door to find his owner standing there alone. "May I come in?" Ezekiel stepped aside. Silas entered and looked around the sparse room. Finally, he spoke. "Tomorrow, you will become one of us. Not fully, never fully, but enough. I want you to understand what that means. I understand what I agreed to. Do you? Do you truly?" Silas sat on the room's single chair, uninvited. "The Brethren has existed for 43 years. In that time, we have never lost a member to exposure, never had someone break our code of silence. Do you know why? Because everyone is equally guilty." "Partly," Silas continued, "but also because we take care of each other. A man joins the Brethren, and suddenly doors open. Business opportunities appear. Legal problems disappear. Enemies find themselves in difficulty. We are not just a society, Ezekiel. We are a network of power that extends across the entire South. Once you are part of that network, even as an associate, you will have access to resources you cannot imagine. And in exchange, I help you murder people. Silas did not flinch. In exchange, you help us maintain the natural order, the strong over the weak, the powerful over the powerless. That is how the world has always worked. We simply acknowledge it and use it to our advantage. You killed my family to demonstrate your commitment to that order. I did, and I would do it again. Because sentiment is weakness. Love is weakness. The moment you allow yourself to care more about individuals than about power, you have already lost. Silas leaned forward. But here is what I want you to understand. Your family is dead. Nothing you do will change that, but you can ensure their deaths meant something. You can use the power the Brethren offers to prevent other families from suffering the same fate. You can work from inside our organization to make changes, to push for less brutal treatment of slaves, to advocate for better conditions. You will have a voice at our table. That is worth something. It was almost convincing. Almost. The idea that Ezekiel could become some kind of reformer from within, using his position to help others. But he knew it was a trap, a rationalization. The moment he participated in their rituals, he would be compromised. The moment he accepted their power, he would be corrupted by it. Why are you telling me this? Ezekiel asked. Because I want you to succeed. Because having you as an ally is more valuable than having you as an enemy. Because I killed your family, but I do not want to kill you. Silas stood. Tomorrow night, you will be asked to do something difficult. Something that will test whether you are truly committed to this path. I am telling you now. Whatever you are asked to do, do it. Do not hesitate. Do not show weakness. Because if you fail that test, both you and Catherine die. Yes, I know she is not really in Philadelphia. I know she is hiding somewhere, planning her own revenge. But I have people watching for her. The moment she surfaces, if you have not proven yourself, she will be found and killed. Do you understand? Ice flooded through Ezekiel. Catherine was alive, but she was in danger, and his actions tomorrow would determine whether she lived or died. I understand, he said quietly. Silas nodded and left without another word. Ezekiel sat alone in the dark cabin, thinking about the impossible position he was in. He had to participate in something monstrous tomorrow. He had to prove himself to monsters. He had to become complicit in evil, or he had to find another way, a third option that neither Silas nor the Brethren anticipated. He pulled out the paper with his family's names and looked at them in the moonlight coming through the window. Forgive me, he whispered, for what I am about to do, for what I have to become. I promise you it will not be for nothing. The gathering began at midnight on June the 3rd. Ezekiel was brought to the cellar by two Brethren members who stripped him to the waist and tied his hands behind his back. They led him down the stairs into the candle-lit chamber where all 13 members waited in their robes. Silas stood at the head of the altar. Brothers of the harvest, tonight we conduct an initiation unlike any in our history. We bring into our circle a man who has every reason to hate us, a man who has lost everything because of what we represent. We do this to prove that our power extends even to our enemies, that anyone can be brought into the fold if the price is right. He gestured, and two more Brethren members brought forward a figure who was bound and gagged, struggling weakly. They placed the person on the altar and stepped back. It was a young woman, enslaved, maybe 18 or 19 years old, utterly terrified. This is your test, Ezekiel, Silas said. To join us, you must participate in our ritual. You must take the knife and make the first cut. You must prove that your desire for revenge against Gaines is stronger than your moral objections to our methods. If you refuse, you die here tonight. If you accept, you become one of us, and we help you destroy the man who killed your family." The other Brethren members began chanting in low, rhythmic sounds, in a language Ezekiel did not recognize. The candles flickered. Shadows danced on the walls. Silas held out a knife, a long blade, wickedly sharp, with a handle wrapped in leather. "Take it. Make the choice." Ezekiel looked at the woman on the altar. She was crying, trying to scream through the gag. Her eyes found his, and in them he saw every enslaved person who had ever suffered at the hands of people like the Brethren. He saw Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth. He saw himself. He looked at the knife, at Silas, at the 13 men watching to see what he would do. This was the moment, the point where he would either become a monster or die resisting. But there was a third option, one he had been planning for 3 weeks, one that required perfect timing and absolute commitment. He took the knife. The Brethren members nodded approvingly. Silas smiled. The chanting increased in intensity. Ezekiel stepped toward the altar. The woman's eyes went wide with terror. He raised the knife, and then he moved, not toward the woman, but toward the nearest Brethren member. The knife flashed in the candlelight and buried itself in the man's throat before anyone could react. Blood sprayed. The man collapsed. Ezekiel grabbed the fallen member's robe, pulling it off in one motion. He threw it over the nearest set of candles, plunging half the room into darkness. Chaos erupted. He moved through the confusion like violence incarnate, years of rage focused into action. He grabbed another man, using him as a shield as someone swung at him, threw the body into 2 more members, tangling them, kicked out at a knee, heard bone crack, grabbed a candle holder, and smashed it into a face. The Brethren were powerful men, but they were not fighters. They were soft, privileged, used to others doing violence for them. Ezekiel was none of those things. He fought his way toward the altar where the woman lay, grabbed her, and cut her bonds with the knife he had somehow kept hold of. "Run!" he shouted, pointing up the stairs. "Run!" She scrambled off the altar and fled. Ezekiel turned back to face the remaining Brethren members, 7 of them still standing, blocking the stairs. "You have made a terrible mistake," Silas said, his voice steady despite the carnage. "You have killed yourself and Catherine both." "Maybe," Ezekiel said, "but I will take as many of you with me as I can." What he did not know was that above them, in the main house, Catherine had returned. She had never gone to Philadelphia. She had been hiding in the slave quarters, waiting, planning, gathering allies among the enslaved people of Cypress Grove. And when she heard the commotion from the cellar, when she saw the young woman burst from the kitchen, screaming, she knew it was time. The reckoning had come. Catherine had spent those 3 weeks recruiting. She had moved from plantation to plantation under the cover of darkness, speaking to enslaved people she had known her whole life, people who had watched her grow up, who had suffered under her father's ownership. She told them about the Brethren, about the cellar, about the rituals, and she told them that tonight was the night they could end it. 23 people came, men and women who had nothing left to lose, who had lost children to the Brethren's rituals, who had watched friends disappear into the swamps, who had endured decades of brutality from men who believed themselves untouchable. They came armed with tools from the fields, axes, scythes, hammers. They came with a rage that had been building for generations. When the young woman burst from the cellar, Catherine led them down. The brethren members, still trying to subdue Ezekiel, did not hear them coming until it was too late. The enslaved people flooded into the cellar like a tide of vengeance. There was no mercy in what followed, no hesitation. These were people who had been told their entire lives they were property, that their suffering did not matter, that their lives had no value. Now they were proving how wrong those beliefs were. The brethren tried to fight. Judge Pelham pulled a pistol, but was struck down before he could fire. Reverend Crenshaw begged for mercy and received none. Marcus Fanning tried to flee up the stairs and was dragged back down. Silas Rutledge, seeing everything collapsing around him, tried one last, desperate play. He grabbed Catherine, pulling her to him with a knife at her throat. "Stop, stop, or I kill her." The room went still. Catherine looked at her father with no fear in her eyes. "Do it. Kill me. It changes nothing. You have already lost. I can still escape. I can still. You can still nothing." Catherine's voice was cold. "You spent 16 years trying to break me, trying to make me forget, trying to convince me I was mad, but you failed. I remembered everything, and I am going to watch you die." She drove her elbow back into his ribs with sudden, vicious force. His grip loosened. She spun away. And before Silas could recover, Ezekiel was there. They faced each other, the enslaved man and the plantation owner. All the power Silas had held, all the privilege and cruelty, all the years of believing himself untouchable, none of it mattered now. "You took everything from me," Ezekiel said quietly. "My wife, my children, my life. You did it for no reason except that you could, to prove something to men who valued cruelty over humanity." "Please," Silas said, just that one word, pathetic and desperate. "Did my wife say please? Did my son? Did any of the people you killed in this cellar?" Ezekiel shook his head. "No mercy. Not for you. Not ever." What happened next was brutal and final. The enslaved people made sure that none of the brethren survived. 13 men who had believed themselves above any consequence learned in their final moments that power was an illusion, that cruelty always comes home eventually. When it was over, Catherine stood in the center of the cellar, surrounded by bodies. She was shaking, not from fear, but from release. 16 years of rage finally given an outlet. Ezekiel came to her. "Are you hurt?" "No. Are you?" "Minor cuts. Nothing serious." He looked around at the carnage. "What do we do now?" "Now." Catherine's smile was grim. "Now we burn it all. The cellar, the ledger, the evidence. We destroy every trace of what happened here. But that evidence could prove what they did, could bring justice." "Justice?" Catherine laughed, a bitter sound. "Look around, Ezekiel. This is justice. The only kind we were ever going to get. If we try to take that ledger to the authorities, what happens? We are hunted down and killed. The surviving Brethren members in other counties come for us. This only ends if everyone believes the Cypress Grove chapter died in an accident. If there is no evidence, no witnesses, no story to tell." She was right, and Ezekiel knew it. "Then we burn it." They spent the next 2 hours preparing. The enslaved people who had helped them left before dawn, disappearing back to their various plantations. They would say nothing. They had seen nothing. They knew nothing. That was how survival worked. Catherine and Ezekiel poured oil throughout the cellar, stacked wood and kindling, placed the bodies in positions that might look like an accident if anyone investigated. Then they took the ledger and all the journals and placed them in the center of the altar. Wait, Ezekiel said. He opened the ledger one last time and found the entries about his family. He carefully tore out those pages, folded them, and placed them inside his shirt. For them, so they are not forgotten. Catherine nodded. Then she took a candle and held it to the oil-soaked wood. The fire caught immediately. Within minutes, the cellar was fully ablaze. They fled up the stairs and out of the house, standing in the yard, watching as flames engulfed Cypress Grove Plantation. People would come. Other plantations would see the smoke. There would be questions, but Catherine and Ezekiel had their story prepared. A terrible accident. A candle knocked over in the cellar. The master and his guests trapped below. So tragic, so terrible. No one would ever know the truth. As the sun rose over the burning ruins, Catherine turned to Ezekiel. What will you do now? Go north. Use the chaos of this fire to disappear. Maybe find others who want to fight, to create a network that can help people escape. He pulled out the paper with his family's names. I cannot bring them back, but I can make sure others do not suffer the same fate. And I will go north as well. Use the money I have been stealing from my father's accounts for years. Start over. She paused. But I will not forget. I will document everything that happened here. I will write it all down so that someday, somehow, someone knows the truth. They sealed the records. They will seal your testimony, too, if you try to make it public. Then I will hide it. I will code it. I will leave it somewhere to be found decades from now, when we are all dead, and it cannot hurt us anymore. She looked at the burning house. The truth has a way of surfacing eventually, even when people try to bury it. They stayed until the fire burned itself out, until Cypress Grove Plantation was nothing but ash and blackened timbers, until there was nothing left to show that 13 men had gathered there to commit atrocities. Then they walked away in opposite directions, Catherine north toward Charleston, and eventually Philadelphia, Ezekiel west toward the frontier, where enslaved people could disappear into communities that asked no questions. They never saw each other again. The official story was exactly as they had planned. A tragic accident. Silas Rutledge and 12 prominent gentlemen meeting at Cypress Grove to discuss business when a fire broke out. All 13 perished in the cellar, overcome by smoke before they could escape. A terrible loss for Colleton County. Funerals with full honors. Eulogies praising their contributions to society. Catherine Rutledge was reported to have died in the fire as well, her father's mad daughter, trapped in her room, unable to escape. A particularly sad footnote to an already tragic event. No one questioned it. No one looked too closely. The enslaved people who had participated said nothing. They had no reason to speak, and every reason to remain silent. Most were sold within months to different plantations as Cypress Grove was liquidated. They scattered across South Carolina and beyond, carrying their secret with them to their graves. Years passed. The ruins of Cypress Grove were eventually demolished. The land was sold, new buildings constructed. Life moved on, as it always does, covering over the past with the present. But whispers persisted. Stories told in slave quarters late at night about the plantation where the masters burned, about the night justice came to men who thought themselves untouchable, about the woman and the man who made it happen. The stories changed with each telling, becoming legend, becoming myth, but the core remained, that cruelty had consequences, that power was not absolute, that sometimes the powerless found their power. In 1863, during the Civil War, Union troops occupied the area where Cypress Grove had stood. They found evidence of old tunnels beneath the property, found bones in the nearby swamp, found markings on trees that suggested ritual sites. But the war moved on, and no one had time to investigate further. In 1971, during demolition work, a journal was found sealed in a wall. It detailed everything: names, dates, rituals, victims. But as Catherine had predicted, it was coded. And before anyone could fully decode it, the journal vanished from the county records. Some say it was destroyed. Others say it was taken by descendants of the Brethren families, protecting their ancestors' secrets. A few believe it still exists somewhere, waiting to be rediscovered when the time is right. What is known is this: 13 prominent men died in a fire in 1841. Catherine Rutledge disappeared shortly afterward, though no body was ever confirmed found. An enslaved man named Ezekiel Cross was reported sold to a plantation in Alabama, but no record of that transaction exists. And for years afterward, stories circulated among enslaved communities about a network helping people escape, led by a man who had faced the monster and won. Whether those stories were true or just wishful thinking, no one can say for certain. But sometimes, truth lives not in official records, but in the stories people tell, in the memories they keep, in the justice they remember, even when history tries to forget. This mystery shows us that power built on cruelty is never as solid as it seems, that secrets kept in darkness eventually find the light, that the people deemed powerless often hold the most dangerous power of all: the power of witness, the power of memory, the power of refusing to forget. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed? Do you think that journal still exists somewhere, waiting to be found? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this tale and want more dark historical mysteries like this one, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story, and share this video with someone who loves mysteries that blur the line between history and horror. These stories need to be remembered. These voices need to be heard. See you in the next video.